Welcome back to Keeping It Apostolic, the most edifying podcast in the world. I'm joined here today with Steve Messeh. Thank you, Steve, for coming onto the podcast.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
So before we get started, we'd like to get to know you a little bit more. So who are you? What's your bio? Give us the rundown.
Sure. I'll give you the elevator pitch.
Go for it.
Born and raised in the D.C. area. Went to school out here. Studied finance. I have a background in finance. I've got a couple different lives. So my first life after college was in the corporate world. I spent about 10 years doing finance, information systems for consulting for the federal government, which everyone in D.C. does. It's kind of a rite of passage here. And then at the same time, I helped start a nonprofit organization called Hope Multiplied, which was associated with a church that was starting here, STSA, St. Timothy and St. Athanasius, Coptic Orthodox Church. So launched that as a volunteer in 2012, and then grew the organization pretty well up until 2016 when I went full-time as the executive director, which is my current title as executive director of Hope Multiplied. That's the quickest I've ever done that. Okay, you must be blessed here. Okay,
that's perfect. So of course that's an amazing thing to, start a nonprofit, be a part of a nonprofit. So my first question is, why did you start Hope Multiplied?
Yeah, well, that's a long one. See, I'm not going to be as quick on that
good.
one as
take your time.
Okay,
take your time.
The stuff about me we just get rid of, because like I said, in 2012. I was a part of a group that was launching a church here in Arlington, Virginia, Washington, D.C., right outside, called STSA. And before we started the church, there's not that many opportunities in life. And you really feel blessed to be able to launch a new ministry, launch a new church. And so we didn't want to just willy-nilly just go into it. And the thing I always remember is, we always used to say, most times when you go to a church and you ask them why they do what they do, most common answer you get is because that's how we did it last week, right? And that's not a bad thing. That's, it's just a part of, why do you do this? Because we did it last week that way. And we didn't have a last week. And so we had this opportunity to say, why are we doing this? Why do we do this? Why is this meeting our goal of bringing an ancient faith into a modern world? So we had all these kind of existential questions. And so before we launched the church, we started looking at what aspects of the church do we want, to have, and kind of what areas of focus and things like that. And I remember we visited many different kinds of churches, right? We visited, Orthodox churches, non-Orthodox churches, urban churches, rural churches, churches that were specialized in family ministries, churches that were more geared to young people. Any church that would basically sit down and take a coffee with us, we would talk to. And there was one church in particular that we visited up in Chicago, Illinois. It's a mega church. It's a big church. They have many, many differences and many things that, didn't really resonate with us. But there was one thing in particular that hit home to me is when one of the people on the leadership team there said that they were an externally focused church. I thought to myself, that's an interesting term, right? Externally focused, because in my head and logically speaking is you start a church to be internally focused, right? The idea is, people come into the church and we invest in them and we pour into them and we want them to be their best. The idea of an externally focused church didn't make sense. That was almost like saying we're a country club that's focused on the neighbor next door or the neighborhood next door. It's like, no, wait a second. You have members and they are invested in your community. You should be pouring into them. And so that idea and that thought I couldn't shake, is what does that really mean to be an externally focused church? A church that was more focused on the people outside of the building than the people inside of the building. And so kind of came back home and started talking and thinking about different things and realized that was the ancient church. That was the ancient faith. And the more we focused on, we want to be an ancient faith in a modern world, that externally focused church really brought us back to our roots. Right? And I'm going to start going on a bunch of tangents, so you can shut me up anytime you want. But when we looked at it, if you go back to Acts chapter 6, okay, in the Bible, Acts chapter 6 is the story of two groups of people that were in the church that were fighting. There was the Hellenic Jews, the Hellenist Jews, and the Hebrew Jews. And if you know anything about ancient culture, right? Hebrew Jews, every other Jew, right? I mean, these were like the fake Jews, right? So all these people now are entering the church and joining the church. And then these Hellenist Jews are saying, wait a second, our communities are not being served. Our neighborhoods are not being served. Our tables are not being served. Our needs are not being met. And so the apostles then said, well, wait a second, that's a problem. Is that if we're just teaching and preaching and praying in the church and worshiping and doing liturgies and things like that, these needs for this community are not being met. So is that right? Is that okay? And the answer was no. And the reason, the way I know that an externally focused church is the way of the apostles and is just as important as attending liturgy and midnight praises and all that, was because the apostles themselves said it's not right to leave the external community for the sacraments and preaching and teaching. So how did they solve it? Acts chapter 7 is my namesake. They ordained 7 deacons that were responsible for taking care of the needs of the community around them. And it said, we will devote ourselves to prayer and the church and investing in the church. And these 7 deacons, starting with the head one, St. Stephen, would be in charge of the needs of the people outside in the community. And so for me, just to kind of bring it back, hopefully, to where we started, is that was that moment of that's what an externally focused church is. A church that doesn't look at the walls of the church as something good, but something to be broken down. A church that brings people into it as members and then sends them out, invests in them, pours into them, and then busts the walls down and goes and meets the needs of the community around it. Did we end up back where we were supposed to be?
Perfect. That was great.
I don't even remember the question, but I love talking. Okay. So yeah, I mean, that's how we started the nonprofit. Now, the why we started the nonprofit is most people ask the question, why didn't you just do it as the church, right? Why this like separate entity? I always say separate, but equal. And so I gave you a somewhat spiritual and pretty philosophical answer right there. Now I give you the really practical answer, which is being in the United States, in the laws that we have and the opportunities that we have, the most strategic way to reach the community isn't always directly through the church. And that's just taking advantage. It's just identifying the lay of the land, the environment that we live in. For example, we do a mentoring program. We started a mentoring program for at-risk kids here in Arlington County. It's a county right outside of Washington, D.C. We started it in 2016 with 6 kids and 6 mentors. Last year, we had 120 kids and 120 mentors in 5 schools. And so when we walk into a public school as Hope Multiplied, we are welcomed. And they love our mentoring program. It is one of the most reputable. We have gained such a great reputation from this mentoring program. But if we walked in as a church, we wouldn't be allowed to do it. Is that, good or bad? It is what it is. I'm not opining on whether or not it's good or bad. That's just the reality that we live in. And so the idea is the ability to access communities in need and children in need and schools and hospitals and facilities, being a nonprofit that is registered separately and run separately and kind of separate at the 10,000 foot level, but connected at the 100,000 foot level, has been the most strategic way of bringing about, the end goal of meeting the needs of the community.
How do you ensure that it is still connected at the 100,000 foot level?
That's a very good question. I remember when we were in Chicago and they had this similar model at that church that we visited. And we were sitting down and it was a group of leaders from our church. And, at that time, we still weren't sure who's going to do what and all that stuff. We had a priest and, that was the start. But the leader of that church, we asked him that same question. How do you make sure there's that synergy? And he said, the key is the leader of the nonprofit and the leader of the church must be completely in sync, almost like brothers. And we laughed because I had a brother in the room who was the priest of the church, and I had a real heart for this community. And so 100%, when the leadership of both entities are completely in sync, it's a beautiful thing. Because as you can imagine, you are pulling from the same resources, right? So you're pulling volunteers from the church and not from the church. In our case, we pull volunteers from both, but financial resources, you're kind of pooling, taking from the same pool. And so when the leaders of both entities, the board of directors, the board of deacons, the executives for each of the entities are completely in sync, that's how you ensure that everything is running smoothly, right? And that the nonprofit is meeting the goals of the church. And so that to me is the biggest, when we sit down as leadership groups and we say, what is the church looking for from the nonprofit? We're looking for opportunities for our community to engage as volunteers. Are we meeting that need? Yes. We're looking for ways to build the reputation of the church in the community. Are we meeting that need? Yes. So ensuring that the needs of the church are met through the nonprofit. But definitely when the leadership are in sync and kind of running smoothly, then that's how you ensure success on both fronts.
And I think that goes back to the point you were making about Acts chapter 6 and chapter 7, where like the leaders of both parts of the church in that time
had
were
all
completely
things
in sync.
common. Exactly.
All things in common. And so I think a lot of times, like I really like the point you made that like why the nonprofit versus just doing it through the church is because that's just how it is, And there's nothing that should stop us from using the resources that we have. And I think a lot of times, specifically as a Coptic Orthodox church, we get scared to use Western techniques or Western ideologies because we feel like it'll taint our faith in some sort of way.
Water down. Exactly.
Or water it down.
We should be wise as serpents and gentle as doves or whatever. I mean, there's a shrewdness there that it just allowed us to open doors. Now, the next question, I'm going to preempt your questions. Can I do that?
Go for it.
Okay, I'm preempting you. We don't even need you anymore. I'll just take over from here. Okay. The question I get a lot of times is, does your organization preach the gospel? Right?
And you did steal my next question.
I felt like you were going there. Okay, we're in sync now. We could start a nonprofit in the church here. Does the nonprofit preach the gospel? And I'll give you the short answer, and we can have a discussion too. Because you get your best ratings when there's controversy. Okay, I'll try to start some controversy here. Okay, that's where you really get your best ratings.
Love it.
Okay, you do something kind of crazy. The short answer is no. And hopefully that gives you the likes and clicks and the negative ones or whatever that you're looking for. We don't preach the gospel at all. We serve the community. And to me, there is a difference between service and evangelism.
Of course.
And the biggest difference to me is service is meeting the needs of a person independent of my relationship with that person. A relationship is not required to meet a physical, social, emotional, or relational need in the community. Sorry, someone in the community just walked in, okay? A relationship is not required to meet the social, emotional, physical. I don't need a relationship with a hungry person to give them a sandwich. But a relationship is required to share the gospel. The days of standing on the street corner with the megaphone saying, repent for the kingdom of heaven is at hand, it's not what we do. And truthfully, those days are over. You know why? Because this generation, I'll say your generation, make myself seem old, but we're in the same generation. This generation of young people is sick and tired of people of yelling at them and preaching to them and selling them. Everybody's selling something. We're in election season. Every politician is selling you on something. Every used car salesman is selling you on something. Every business person, everything is selling it. Now is the time for action. And the idea is, don't yell at me about how you're going to feed someone. Show me it. Don't yell at me about I'm supposed to love someone. Let me see you love someone. And I'll tell you, when young people see action, not words, it moves them. And it convinces them, these guys are different. These guys are doing it right. I'm sold on these guys. Evangelism to me is relational in the sense of, sorry, there's critters all over the place here. Evangelism, and hopefully that door is going to get closed in a second. There you go. In order to bring someone to Christ, there must be a relationship. There must be a connection to that person, a care for the soul. And so I'll go back to do we preach the gospel? As an organization, no. But like I said, we had 120 mentors this past school year for volunteering in our mentoring program. Only like 12 of them came from the Coptic Orthodox Church that we partner with. I'm just being honest now, and I'm just putting numbers out there that, might be surprising. So we had 12 out of 120. So we had 108 people that I don't know their faith background. I don't know anything about their relationship with Christ, their involvement in the church, their belief system. I don't know nothing about that, because that is not a prerequisite to volunteer at Hope Multiplied. However, when I stand in front of the church, I say, I'm bringing 108 people to your doorstep that if you, Isaiah, as a member of STSA, volunteer in this program, you would have the opportunity to build 108 relationships with people to bring them to Christ, depending on where they are in their spiritual life. So now, the evangelism and the relational aspect of that evangelism is volunteer to volunteer, not organization to community. You see what I'm saying? So, people always ask, is your organization a Christian organization? I swear, I don't know I don't know what that even means. I'm the head of it and I'm a Christian. What does that mean? Does that mean yes? I don't know. And in a registration, with the federal government, we're a non-religious entity. That's so I have access to funding. And so I can have access to grants and foundations and things like that. But, to me, everyone gets involved with the organization. Everyone volunteers. They all have their own personal motivation. Mine is faith-based. Mine is because God has blessed me and given me so much and been so good to me that I have to give back, that I am called to give back because I have been so blessed and so loved by my Heavenly Father that it is my duty to give back. You might have a different one. That's okay. That's for me to build a relationship with you and share my personal motivation and get to know yours. We went on that was a big tangent.
I have a lot of points to make. I think the first one is I'm going to disagree.
I love it. Oh, now you're going for this is clickbait right here, okay?
I'm going to disagree that evangelism requires a relationship. I think the way when we think of the word evangelism, I agree. But I think true evangelism is through action and not word. Like there's a very famous saying by Mona Bishoy Camel, people don't need to hear about Christ, they need to see Christ. So our form of evangelism as Orthodox Christians is not standing on the corner of the street with the megaphone. That is not that's never in the history of our church how evangelism has worked. Evangelism for us is through example. You look at all the martyrs of our church, all the saints of our church, a lot of them did not talk a lot. A lot of them barely spoke. And through their lives and through the way how they conducted their lives, they were able to draw people towards them, because Orthodoxy is about obtaining the Spirit from the people around you. It's not about listening to the words. I had Joe asked me on the podcast yesterday. We were talking a little about discipleship, and he was saying a disciple gets the spirit of the elder. They don't get the words of the elder. Like I don't know for you, but I don't think you've ever remembered a single Sunday school lesson in your life. Zero. But you'll remember things that your servants did, your Sunday school servants did, that left an impact on you as you were growing up in the faith. And so I think this idea that evangelism has to be yelling in people's faces, that's not evangelism, that's harassment. And so I disagree that evangelism requires a relationship, but I do agree that in today's modern, when we say evangelism, what we think, I agree 100%. Yeah,
100%. It's direct evangelism requires, you're right, like really. But, we have 3 core values at Hope Multiplied that kind of drive everything we do. And you just kind of prompted. I'll spare you the first 2. The first 2 is we start with the need. The second one is we use passionate people. And the third one is we love with no strings attached. And that to me is the biggest differentiator between what we do versus what the problem is, what other nonprofits do in the area, in the sense that I always tell our volunteers when I do like a volunteer orientation, our goal is to confuse the hell out of the people that we serve. That when they walk into a program in our space and they leave, I want them to say, what did that person get out of that hour that he or she volunteered? What did that community get by giving away all of those things? Or by, where's the catch? I deal with a lot of people in need just by the nature of my job. And what I have come to find out is people are very cynical these days, and with good reason, right? So when you go to help someone in need, you go give them a sandwich or a word of encouragement or a cup of water or whatever. There's always this like, what's the catch? Like, when's the other shoe going to drop? Or what do you want in return? And that's the beauty, is when I can look at someone in the face and say, nothing at all. I'm just here to provide some meet some need for you, provide some goodness for you. Just, make sure you're doing okay. And, that to me is the most powerful thing you can do, is love someone with no strings attached, is to confuse them. You want them walking away saying, there's no way. Like, there's no way that they just did that for no reason or whatever. So you're right. That to me is evangelism. That to me is, and the reality is, I'll give you some more clickbait here, is the love with no strings attached. The reason it's so powerful and the reason there's so much cynicism, the worst offenders of the transactional community service, of the transactional philanthropy, is Christians. It's Christians, right? It's, here's a cup of cold water. Now listen to me talk for 10 minutes. Or here's a sandwich. Sign up for my email distro list. Or here's something. Jump into the baptism. Jump into the baptistry now. My numbers need to be inflated a little bit. So we've got a lot. Like, they don't call it a white savior complex for nothing. Is like, when you go to Africa and stuff, you see that oftentimes. And so it's imperative on us to ensure that when we serve, especially with the personal motivations that me and you have, that it is out of the purity of Christ. And it is out of that love of Christ, which expects nothing in return, which asks for nothing in return. You don't need to listen to me talk for 5 minutes. You don't need to sign up for anything. It is here for free. And that to me is the essence of God's love, right? That's that's literally the definition of what God did for us. It's a free gift. Here it is. There's zero requirement for it.
I remember, I don't know if you remember this, but one of my first times in DC, a year and a half ago, maybe, I served in an event with Hope Multiplied. I think it was like barbecue. Saturday morning.
Was it barbecue?
No. It was Saturday morning, just like giving out like coffee. It was in the winter.
Okay. Giving
out like clothes and coffee and stuff. And you're so right about how people are so like
cynicism.
Yeah, they like the skepticism is through the roof, and I'm sure now even much more than it was a year ago.
Yeah.
And you really feel for these people, because I remember like what struck me the most is because we were in DC, like you can see the White House. The White House is right there, like. You turn your head and the White House is right in front of you. Yeah. And there's people
you
across
could
the street.
Spit at it if you wanted to.
There's people across the street who have like nothing less than nothing, like zero. And for me to think like, this is the most powerful building in the world. And across the street, this is the situation. It really hit me hard, and it made me realize that, like loving with no strings attached, serving with no strings attached, just serving purely out of Christ's love is what's most needed in today's world, by far.
That reminds me, we can bash the government a little bit more. In 2017, we had somebody donated a 40-foot RV to the organization in memory of their wife who had just departed. Basically, this guy came to me and said, hey, I got this mobile home. It's 45 feet. It's huge. Do whatever you want with it. And the whole time I'm thinking, I'm not like some, REI store. Like, what am I going to do with this mobile home or whatever? And so we prayed and we talked and we said, like, how can we use this in the service of others? Like, how can we really do something great with this? And at the same time, I had been linked up with some executives from the local children's hospital here in DC, which is the third largest children's hospital in the country. It's a big deal. And they started talking to me about mobile health. And the idea was in 2017, theoretically, and we know this not to be true, but theoretically, everyone was insured under the Affordable Care Act, more commonly known as Obamacare. And so theoretically, everyone has insurance. But if you go into certain communities and certain impoverished neighborhoods here in DC, the difference between having insurance versus having access to healthcare is night and day. If you're a single mom with 4 kids and you got to take 3 different metro systems to get to a primary care facility, that ain't healthcare. That ain't access to healthcare. That's an insurance card. So I don't care if you have the most golden, most beautiful insurance card in your pocket. If you don't have access to healthcare, then that's completely useless. And so what we did is we decided we would take the 45-foot RV, partner with the Children's Hospital, and turn it into a full-scale pediatric mobile health clinic, providing access to healthcare for about 1,200 kids here in the DC area. And so, I remember the dichotomy at the time is actually where we parked the clinic was on Pennsylvania Avenue, which is where the White House is, but more closer to it is where Congress is, where the Capitol is. And I remember at the time, Congress was arguing about, getting rid of some program for kids and some like health insurance thing. And the dichotomy of, we're not going to wait around for that building over there to provide access. We are going to bring healthcare to the people. And so, I love that story. Forget about the bashing of the government, but I love that story because the RV at the time, like using anything for the glory of God, that's what it proved to me. And it proved that like anyone that offers anything, anyone or anything that is offered in the service of others can be used for the glory of God. This guy's given up this 40-foot. We were going to just sell it and make some money from it and whatever. And now it is literally bringing healing to thousands of kids all over the DC area. And so, like, you never know what your gift, it's that 5 loaves and 2 fish kind of thing is everyone brings their offering, and it takes some creative people and it takes some people that are willing to, like you alluded to earlier, think outside the box a little bit. But anything and anyone can be used for the glory of God in a big way.
I'm going to connect that back to the book of Acts, where it says that they left all things at the disciples' feet. Like you said, 5 loaves and 2 fish. Like, you bring whatever you have, whatever you can offer, and just at the feet of Christ, and he will do as he wills with it. And so I think that, like, a lot of times people struggle to see, especially in our modern era, where our service as humans intersects with God's like providence and his will and what he does in working. And so I think a lot of times that we like to think it's like us that are doing it. Like, we're doing the service, so we feel good about ourselves. And it's a very natural thing to do, is to be like, I'm doing the service, so like it's because of us. When in reality, not a single event would be possible without so many miracles. I don't know about you with the service, but I can even say for my own service with this podcast, the amount of things that go wrong at any moment in time for any single recording, I couldn't count. I couldn't count the amount of times that God has done something to just let things pass. Like a 5-year-old walking into the room. Okay. I wasn't going to say
and getting her seashells. Okay. You can't edit that out. Don't you edit that out.
Okay.
That's my daughter's one chance at stardom here on this podcast. Okay.
We'll leave it in. But like there's so many things. Like, even if you think about just general church services, there are millions of things that go wrong on a day-to-day basis, but God provides. Mm-hmm. God provides. And so I think service can be a window for us to see God working in our lives and within the service itself.
100%. And what I love about the service at Hope is, I don't know how you were growing up, but when I was grew up in the church, it was very, okay, you're a boy, so be a deacon and a Sunday school teacher. You're a girl and be a Sunday school teacher, right? It wasn't that many ways to get involved. There was a box, and we call that box service. And if you fit in that box, good. If you didn't, khusara, right? Like, sorry, you gotta find something else. And so what I love about Hope is I love getting the non-Sunday school teachers, the people that think they don't fit in church or in that service, and say, hey, bring your gifts over here. I remember I had a buddy who, like 100 tattoos and, just like was a fish out of water in church. And one time we were talking, he said, oh, I do haircuts. I said, haircuts? It's amazing. I said, we serve like a homeless community in DC. We came up with a crazy idea. Why don't we set up shop one Saturday? We'll get some chairs. We'll get a generator. You get your haircut equipment. we'll do haircuts for the homeless. And I'm telling you, Isaiah, we pulled up one day at Franklin Square here in DC, and the line, he probably did 60 haircuts in 4 hours and probably didn't get through everyone. He was doing men's, women's. They were never happier than when they sit down. You get a fresh cut and you get that fade and it looks good. It made them feel like they were valued, you know, like they were good enough to get a haircut. It sounds stupid, but it's not, because when every single day you're told you're not worthy of a haircut, you're not worthy of a home, you're not worthy of a roof over your head, and you get that fresh haircut, you walk out, you probably feel like $1 million. You probably feel like Denzel or Brad Pitt or, you know, whoever is. So that guy, he ain't never going to teach Sunday school, nor should he. I love that guy, but he shouldn't teach Sunday school. But that guy was the gospel of Christ to tens of people that day. And that guy is using his gift for the glory of God, and we should celebrate that. And my thing is, if you don't fit in to the box, and the box is great. I'm not saying none of that. That's all. We need that. That is essential to the church. Acts chapter 6, they said we're going to devote ourselves to the preaching and teaching and the liturgical part of the church. But then there's this other group. And if you don't fit into that, that doesn't mean you don't belong. It means God's going to use your gifts, your talents, and your unique abilities in the service of others in a really special way. And so it takes some trial and error. You know, we've got a 12-year-old. This kid's 12. He's going on 30. He's a very mature kid. He learned how to code. Like in one of his, spend thousands of dollars. He learned how to code. So now he comes to our mentoring program in our 4th graders and teaches them how to code. A 12-year-old doing it to 10-year-olds. Yeah. You know, but this kid is learning that I have been given a gift. I have been given something good. Let me give it to others. It's a beautiful thing.
I love how you mentioned that the gifts don't have to be within the box. I think a lot of times we think of gifts and we think of like 2 or 3 things, like the ability to speak, like speak publicly, have good public speaking, the ability to like connect with kids, and then like the ability to like make urbon, and like that's about it. Like, you know, like we're very limited in our, or like have a good voice. Like we're very limited in what we consider gifts. And I think like how naive of us to put God in a box and say these are your gifts. Like, of course, it's not true. Of course, like it's infinite.
100%.
And so I think, I serve OCCM, which is Orthodox Christian Campus Ministries. It's a basically Coptic club, Orthodox Christian club for like across the entire Southern United States, throughout like all of the different schools.
And I loved you called it Coptic. Like the Coptic just takes over the Orthodox. Okay, as if none of those other guys exist. Okay, it's amazing. Okay. We're a conquering people. So,
literally, that's what it feels like. And so I'm on the community service, like regional leaders area committee. And like one of the things that we're really trying to push this year across all of the campuses is like, be creative. Like we don't want to see you cleaning the church is great. Now you don't need to clean the church 12 times in a semester. Like the church is not even cleaned that many times, you know?
Yeah.
Or like homeless drive. Great. We don't need 120 of them, you know? Or like working with like Habitat for Humanity. Habitat for Humanity is great, but there's other organizations,
Jimmy
other
Carter,
things.
He's got it. Yeah, Jimmy Carter's got it on lockdown.
Exactly. Like there's so many other things that you can do, and so I think creativity within the service is something that is lacking so much in the church because we get stuck in the motions, we get stuck in the routine, we get stuck in Sunday school, the diaconate, homeless drives when we do them every once in a while, soup kitchens, like the same things over and over and over again. And not to say those things are not important. They're of course necessary. If you don't have a clean church, well, you can't have church. So of course it's necessary. But I think that creativity within the service is what can set orthodoxy apart in the modern world. Because we already have this movement nowadays where people are flocking to orthodoxy. But what is going to be that thing that reaches the next, like that next bubble of people, like that next outer circle, is I think creative types of services. So that leads me to my next question, which are, you alluded to a few of them, but what are some like creative services that Hope Multiplied does and that wants to get the community more involved in?
Yeah. We got tons of guests all over the place here. Okay. The stuff happening behind the camera is much more fun than what's happening in front of the camera. It's funny that you bring that up, right? Because we're actually about to launch. A lot of our programs are school-based. And so, middle of August here, we're actually getting ready to kick off a bunch of our programs. And actually, a new program we're launching, something I'm really excited about. It's called Hope Amplified. And the way this program came about is, like I said, we have our mentoring program. And that mentoring program is very much like a big brother, big sister kind of relationship building for at-risk kids. But in addition to that, what we noticed, especially in this Northern Virginia area, it's a very wealthy, very affluent area. And so there's a very have and have not kind of situation here where, the haves have access to so many resources and opportunities and whatever. And so one of the things we were thinking about is this program is going to, on a monthly basis, provide at-risk kids in the public school system with opportunities and experiences that they wouldn't normally have. And so I'll give you an example, especially related to the stuff going on behind the camera right now, is my 3 children, before every sports season, right? So soccer in the fall, basketball in the winter, baseball in the spring. I'll put them in camps to get them ready for tryouts, right? It's a very competitive kind of, little league and all that. And so I'll spend more than you ever can imagine and want to know getting them ready for tryouts and putting them in the private coaching and pitching and hitting and all that. And so if you don't have the resources or the means to provide that for the kids, then the kid gets screwed in tryouts and whatever. So what we're doing, like I said, on a monthly basis, actually next month, we're doing a full soccer clinic for at-risk kids in our program. It's a full-day clinic right before soccer tryouts for Arlington County's soccer teams, right? And so, again, just kind of thinking outside the box is bringing volunteers to put on a soccer camp for kids. And you would not believe the reactions we get from the parents that, like, you're not a parent. I know you're not a parent. I was going to ask if you're a parent. You're not a parent. I know you're not a parent unless you want to announce. But as a parent, you could not believe if I couldn't provide my kids that opportunity before the tryout or before the season, how that would make me feel, right? And so are doing this for them. The next month we're doing, like I said, like a coding camp for kids. Like, why should just the haves have access to coding? Why can't these kids able to get ahead and kind of get their academics going, things like that. So that's one of the programs I think is going to really set, Hope Multiplied apart, especially in this area. And a lot of the programs, a lot of the events that we're doing is going to utilize the STSA space, the church's space. So you talk about reputation. When you're walking down the street and your son or daughter just had an incredible paint experience or art and craft experience or soccer experience at that church, you're walking by saying, oh, what? That's a church? That's the church that little Johnny or little Susie had this incredible camp. They must be incredible. They must be doing some incredible work. I remember, just going off on a tangent here, when we were building the church, and the priest of the church, Father Anthony, he had to go to like all these neighborhood meetings, and get all these approvals from the neighbors and all that. It's a huge headache, as most churches can empathize with. And so he was in this like neighborhood meeting of like all the big shot neighbors and all the big committee people needing to approve this building. And he's nervous and whatever. And he's giving his little spiel, and no one is a fan of this, right? No one is happy that this group of Egyptians or this group of people are about to enter, kind of take over the space. And so he finishes his spiel and kind of a lukewarm response, until a woman who is a very influential person in the community stands up in the meeting and says, wait a second, that Father Anthony and that church does a mentoring program at my school. I'm the principal of Drew Elementary School, which is the neighborhood school down the street. And she said, I vouch for the work they're doing, and what they're doing is incredible. And the people I've met as a part of that church and a part of that organization are incredible. And they are exactly who we need in this community. And they've already been giving to our community before they've had that building. And so it is imperative that we all get behind them and support them. And he didn't know anything. He never even met the woman. But he said, this is incredible that our reputation precedes us even before we get into the community. And so that's, that programming, especially we're doing there. The other thing we're doing, which again, outside the box, we do a social entrepreneurship program for inner city high school kids. And so we put them through like this social entrepreneurial kind of boot camp. And at the end of it, we actually do like a Shark Tank competition. So
That's
these
cool.
kids design their own businesses and their own, kind of real world businesses with the proposals and presentations. Then they pitch it to business leaders. So we bring judges, same kind of deal as Shark Tank. And at the end of it, we actually give seed money for companies to launch their business. And so we kind of track it and manage it, and we provide them with mentors, business mentors, things like that. So, like you said, just thinking outside the box. Yeah, the homeless food drive is nice and whatever, but as we've been talking, the people that are going to attract the people and the people that are going to get this generation of people, which has noise and distractions beyond belief, are the people that are going to think strategically outside of the box of how do we really make an impact in these communities? How do we really bring the love of Christ in a strategic way into these communities?
My one question is why has it not spread past the Northern Virginia area?
When you say it,
Hope Multiplied.
why has it not spread past the answer is it has.
Okay.
And what I've done, and I actually think there's a couple groups that I've basically invested in other groups that have wanted to start similar organizations. Now, the question I get oftentimes is, can we have a Hope Multiplied in so-and-so city? And my answer is always no. Let me help you start your own. Because to me, Hope Multiplied was built on the DC area and all of its idiosyncrasies and all of its kind of unique things and all that. My thing is, let me give you principles and the principles with which we built this to build your own thing. We're not looking to build empires here. We are looking to share our best practices and our failures and our everything with other people that have similar mindsets to do the same thing. But it is not a one size fits all. This isn't a franchise opportunity. We want you to invest in your communities and build something that fits your communities and your people and your network. We've built something, and like I said, when we were building STSA, we went and met with churches and took ideas from, but didn't just say, oh, but that's a great church, let's just replicate it. No. We build the faith according to the area and environment that we're in here, and we can take bits and pieces from, different things. But there's actually been an Indian Orthodox organization that was started up in New Jersey that I was, helping out or just being a part of and supporting. There are Coptic churches that have started similar entities. But, every area is different.
Of course.
And it requires a lot of wisdom and a lot of guidance from the leadership. It's just speaking candidly, it's different. If you're in a diocese, the diocese typically has similar things that you go through those things. You don't just kind of start your own thing because it's part of a larger entity. So, there's a system. In Egypt, they have, all these like bless, all the bishoprics and things like that are doing the social services. So, the church has been doing this. This is not a novel idea. The church has been doing this in Egypt and abroad for years. It's just a matter of each area kind of doing their thing.
I really like that because I think the temptation is to fall to the American business mindset and just spread it everywhere and just make it, one thing. But I think that really, by separating it and by having people do their own thing, really shows the spirit of the church. It really helps the church's spirit be developed within that community. Because I feel like, I've traveled what feels like the entire world this summer just doing this. And you'd be surprised how different, I've just been to Coptic churches, how different each Coptic church community is, and they're not even close. Like, these are all Egyptians who all immigrated from Egypt in the last 100 years, and there's not two churches that are remotely similar.
Yeah. And
so I really agree with that point that the things should be different based on the regions that they're a part of.
I told you we had three core values that drive everything. The first one was start with the need. And so what I didn't say is, before we launch a program at Hope, we have 6 programs throughout the DC area. Before we launch a program in any community in the DC area, we spend at least 6 months studying, identifying the greatest need in that community, and meeting and connecting with people on the ground. Because to me, the hubris and the arrogance of walking into a new community and saying, I know what you guys need. You need a homeless shelter. And you look around, there's not a homeless person within 10 miles of here. Saying, what are you doing? Is it just like, it's because you know how to build homeless shelters? Is that why you're doing it? Or, you got some funding for a homeless shelter? Or, God forbid, it looks good on an Instagram post? Like, why are you doing it? Have you actually spent 1 minute connecting with people on the ground, talking to people? Maybe they do need a homeless shelter. Maybe there's 10 homeless shelters, and other organizations have already built 30. So you're going to be number 31? So the hubris, the humility that is required to walk into a community and say, I am here to serve, and I am here to listen, and I am here to connect. When you walk, and I can, I don't know how long you're in town for, but I can walk you through some of these neighborhoods and communities. And when you walk the streets and you sit down and talk to people and you look at them face to face and you make eye contact and you have this human connection and this understanding of another person and their needs and their community around them, is very powerful to build programming off of that. In DC, there are neighborhoods that are so vastly different. Until this day, someone smarter than me needs to explain to me how there are nonprofits that are doing the exact same thing in Ward 7 and Ward 4. Two things that don't mean anything to you. But Ward 7 and Ward 4, there are communities, nonprofits doing the exact same programming and exact same services in each. Ward 4 is a 95% Hispanic population. Ward 7 is a 98% African American population. Are you going to tell me that their needs are the exact same, that their programming should look the exact same, should have the exact same language that it's being delivered in, that should have, we do a food insecurity program in both of those communities. The actual food that's given is wildly different based on their cultures and values and needs and whatever. So even if we actually have the same program, the delivery and impact and strategy behind it is so different because it is tailored to those specific communities. You go to Ward 4, you're going to get a lot of tortillas and, it's a Hispanic population. We give them what they want. And Ward 7 is totally different. And so it all kind of goes back to that strategic thinking is, having that humility of saying, I am here to serve. I am here to listen. I'm here to connect. That's where it begins and kind of moves to. How's that for a tangent? You don't even remember the question.
Nope.
Okay, you're waiting on a distraction to walk in.
I wouldn't say that. I think I feel like everything ties back to humility. I think it's St. John Climacus, or maybe St. John of the Cross, one of them, says that humility is the foundation that the tower of virtues is built upon. So without humility, there is nothing. There is no love. There is no service. There is no joy. There is nothing. And so I think especially because something that really, really ticks me off is
here we go. Let's go. We're on a venting session. There's more clicks right here.
Something that really ticks me off is nonprofits, like you said, that just go in and just do whatever they feel like they want to do. And there's no thought process behind it. I think even for myself, we do these community service events for OCCM, and it's you see a school in Dallas do something, you're copy it. No, you don't copy it. That's not the goal is not to just do what's easy. The goal is not to just do what everyone else does. The goal is to genuinely serve the community. So how can we, put the pride aside, put the laziness aside, and how can we practically really just serve the community as the community needs to be served? And flip the mic around.
See, you're already serving. One of the prerequisites to everything you just said, which I loved, is if you really want my honest answer, I don't give the spiritual answers, okay? It's going to require some risk taking. And being on our soapbox of just doing things the same way, or doing things because we did it last week, or doing things because that organization is doing it that way. That's the safe solution. That's the way that there's no risk involved in that. If it goes wrong, you know who we blame? The other guys,
Yeah.
right? They told us the wrong thing or whatever, What I'm looking for is the next generation of risk takers. People that are going to write the cross as foolishness to them, right? Is like, they are going to look foolish to say, hey, we got to try some different things. We got to try some haircuts in the square for the homeless. That's a really stupid idea. I mean, when we initially, it's going to require some stupid ideas and some risks and some failures. I mean, I don't know how long this podcast is, but we could do a much longer one on my failures versus all the nice things that I've been talking about and all my successes and accomplishments. The failure one we can do for double, because I have failed significantly more than I've succeeded. And so to me, I'm sure there are wonderful people watching that have this heart of humility and this heart of service. And so, yes, humility is required as the tower of virtue and everything you said, and love and all that. But the courage to go and try something new and different, and, with wisdom, with discernment, with,
like counting the cost.
Exactly. But, to me, I try to err on the side of like, what do we lack? We're good at the counting. We've got the accountants, and we accounted and we counted and we counted. And, humility we understand, and love we understand. But the risk and the courage and the bravery is like, when you look at those ancient churches and those ancient fathers and St. John yelling at the people, that were in the arenas and all that, the bravery, they were more outside the box than we know. St. Athanasius was literally outside the box when he said, I'm against the world, right? The box is the world. He was literally against the world. He was outside of that box. And so, I think that is a part of our faith is, that risk taking, that bravery. Back several centuries ago, it looked like persecution and standing up to, emperors and Diocletian and things like that. How does it look now? Maybe it looks like saying, hey, there are neighborhoods nobody wants to serve. I'm going to go serve. There are projects that people think are stupid or, a waste of time. I'm going to explore them. I'm going to see if it's something that can be glorifying to God. There are needs that nobody wants to touch, that are, not the most appealing or the most fun or whatever. I'm going to tackle those. I always, when I talk to certain volunteer groups, I talk about this idea of holy discontent. And holy discontent is a term that was used to describe, like, every single person inside of them has a thing that, like, gets them out of bed in the morning, like an injustice or a problem or a need or some type of thing. I always, joke and say, like, Hope is never going to have a program for old people, for like senior citizens, because I have people that are old in my life, but I just don't care. I don't care that we got to edit that one. it's not like a burning passion in my heart as a need, but there are people that absolutely burn with passion to meet the needs of the elderly, and it burns them up and it eats them alive. That's holy discontent. And so my thing is, every single person that has been created by their creator and master and Lord has been given this holy discontent. It is your responsibility to go and find it. And your thing might be totally different. It should be totally different than someone else's. That's okay. That's what it's supposed to be. And so you go and you find that. And who knows that? Maybe it's something small. Maybe it's something big. Maybe it starts small and moves something big. Whatever it is, you are doing a disservice by suppressing that holy discontent and joining someone else's. Is that you are missing out on a part of you. I'm a business guy, so that's why we actually started that entrepreneurial program. That to me was burning me up inside. I couldn't square how there was so much economic opportunity and this cycle of poverty that would get these generations of people in these communities. How do we really break that cycle of poverty? Was for me, economic opportunity, access to jobs, access to businesses, things like that. So that's why I started that program. But that's because it was on my heart, because that's how I'm made. It's because how God kind of wired me. And so I don't know the original question, but I'm sure I answered it. Okay. And it's, that to me is the idea is every single person listening here has a calling and a gift, and your calling matches your gift. We were made by a perfect creator that endowed us with everything we need to meet his perfect calling for our lives. So, if there is a need in your community that's not being met, instead of complaining, which is obviously a number one thing that we do, look in the mirror. Maybe it's you. Maybe it's your calling. Maybe it's your thing. If you keep noticing that, like, hey, someone's not doing this, instead of complaining and picking up the phone and whatever, maybe it's you. Maybe that's the reason you keep on noticing it. Maybe that's where you belong.
Why do you think people are scared to take that step?
Well, it's uncomfortable. Because the chance of failure, are we being honest, is probably 70%. Because it's so much nicer to live in our bubble, in our box, in our comfort. It's much nicer. It's safe. It's.
But that's not our calling as Christians.
If I'll give a more controversial answer, see if we can jack up these negatives.
I'm loving this.
My parents helped build the church here in Washington, as I'm sure your parents did, or maybe your grandparents or whatever. My parents were immigrated here to America as first generation kind of immigrants. And so when you're building the church here in America, you're building it from what you know in Egypt as this first generation, right? And so the idea in Egypt was, and may still be, and probably still is the church is our safe harbor, right? They always talk about the church as like Noah's Ark, and one of the shapes that they built it in. And so like the church in Egypt, the whole premise of the church is let's bring everyone inside the doors of the church. And what do? Lock that sucker. Lock that door. And let's build walls as big so the barbers and, all those barbarians and things we read about, none of those guys can get in because there's bad stuff outside. There's danger outside. And completely rightfully so. This is a church of thousands of years of persecution. That is the smartest and most obvious way to keep the church and preserve the faith.
Of course.
But you get to America,
where you don't have that problem.
You have the exact opposite. But through no fault of anyone's, we default on what we know.
Of course.
How many times do we say, okay, bring the youth into the church Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday. Lock the doors. I don't know if you're doing Arabic on here, but don't let them go out there. There's bad stuff out there. There's bad stuff. No. The church is safe. The church is good. The church is this. And it's like, wait a second. Yeah, we bring them in to send them out. We're in a different place now. We're in a different calling now. That was to preserve this faith. The need to preserve the faith is the same, but that might be how we preserve that faith is by going out, not bringing everyone in. So the church we're almost in that like awkward junior high phase, right? With the pimples and the zits, and like the church is being built here in America. I mean, we're talking about 50, 60 years now. And so, there was a phase one, and phase one was very successful compared to any other Orthodox church.
110%.
What our parents and that generation and the leadership and those bishops and metropolitans and priests and leaders did will be historical, and obviously led by Pope Shenouda, who was, this figure that had this vision for the church that other patriarchs didn't. And so, the way they built that church, that was phase one. And it's been the most successful. There are churches all over the country and the world that have been brought the faith from Egypt and preserved it to America. Now the question is, what's next? And what does phase two look like? And that's above my pay grade, okay? And that's for people that are a lot smarter than me. But certainly, a part of it that cannot be ignored is the externally focused church, kind of bringing it full circle. And so that to me is, that's a part of the next phase. What part that plays, I don't get paid enough to answer that question, nor am I smart enough and wise enough. But I trust the leadership, and I see it every single day with the priests and the bishops, and who have that same mentality. That's the job of the shepherds that are over us to really direct us into that. I fully expect that to happen in the next 50 years.
I agree wholeheartedly. I think that's a perfect way
You see that?
to wrap it all together.
No controversy, no nothing.
It's
Okay.
perfect. Is there anything else you would like to mention?
No, I mean, I appreciate the platform. I think what you're doing is, I love seeing, I'm not that old, but somehow I feel old sitting next to you. I mean, I think, not to toot your own horn, but I think you're an example, someone who's thinking outside the box, is that this is a stupid idea, and I love that.
It is a very stupid
It's
idea.
a completely stupid
You're right.
idea. You came to DC and doing all this. I love it. I absolutely love it. And I know that this will be used for the glory of God because you're putting yourself out there. I love that concept, is laugh at me, mock me, shame me, whatever. This is what is in my heart. And I'm putting myself out there and being vulnerable. I love that. I hope I hope you influence more and more people to do the same thing.
All glory to God. It really is a blessing. I always say, like, no one benefits more than me. No one benefits more from these podcasts than me. I have an excuse to bother people who would never talk to me, to pick their brains for hours at a time just to talk about Christ. So I am the most blessed and the most benefited from it. So
Amen.
it really is a gift.
Amen.
Well, thank you, Steve, for coming onto the podcast. It was a blessing and a pleasure. And thank you guys for watching. Make sure to like, comment, subscribe, turn on post notifications, and see you guys next week. Thank you.